Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how's it going? I'd like to ask you a question about FDR's New Deal, but before I begin, I just want to say I'm not being paid by any right-wing think tank. Those numbers, I had never heard of the American Action Forum, so that was just the first Google result about the Green New Deal. But my question is, I admire what he did during the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt, he spent money using, Keynes demand-side economics to put people back to work to create demand in the economy. So my question is, what should the percentage, what should the government spending as a percentage of the gross domestic product be, or how much do we spend to do that without running into the problem of hyperinflation? That's my question.
Well, hyperinflation comes about as a consequence. There's two ways that you can create hyperinflation. The first is by debasing your currency, by printing more dollars than you need, basically. And that's never going to happen in the United States. And that has never happened in any developed country. That's what happened in Zimbabwe, right? That's what happened in Germany after World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles imposed this huge punishing fine, basically, on Germany, where Germany had to pay, hundreds of billions of dollars of Deutschmarks in order to satisfy the Treaty of Versailles. And so, they intentionally debased their currency because the amount was specified in the treaty, as I recall. And so they could pay off that treaty with dollars that were worth pennies, if that makes sense. But the main way that you have inflation, the way that we had inflation in the United States in the 1970s, for example, and there have been 2 or 3 times in our history where we've had inflation as a consequence of this, is when a commodity that is absolutely essential to the economy becomes unavailable or is lost in its availability. Typically, in other countries, that's food. In the United States in the 70s, it was oil. And so when a commodity that you can't have a country work without becomes scarce, the price of that commodity goes up. The price of that commodity going up drives up the price of everything else, particularly if that commodity is associated with everything else. In other words, you can't live if you don't have food. You can't have an economy that functions if you don't have oil, at least, because we haven't made the conversion to solar. And so government spending is not what produces inflation, unless it's so great that, like I said, it debases the currency. And that has never happened in the history of the United States, and I don't think it ever will. So the larger question then, Dennis, becomes how much of the economy do you want the government to be? In Canada, the government is almost 40% of the economy. In the United States, it's about 20%. Why? Because in Canada, the government pays for the healthcare system. It doesn't run it, but it pays for it. And the Canadians, and by the way, this is true of most European countries. Most European countries, what you find is that the government sector is between 30 and 40% of total economic activity, whereas in the United States, it's around 20%. If you're simply shifting healthcare expenses from for-profit companies that are skimming hundreds of billions of dollars in profit off the top for their rich buddies and move that to government, it's not only not going to create inflation, it's actually going to lower prices, and it's going to save the entire economy money, even though you've moved it out of the private sector and into the public sector. That's meaningless in terms of whether or not you have inflation. It's not more dollars chasing fewer goods or fewer goods being chased by more dollars, deflation or inflation. So there's not a magic number. It's like, what do you think the government should do?